sing sama.
Hi class, welcome to our presentation today. So today we're going to talk about pragmatic dimension, coherence in translation, narrative analysis and translation. Before we start our presentation today, let me introduce our members. Intan Kusuma Nuur Amini, Jullien Magdalena Welan, and Rahmah Dinda Awaliyah. Today we will discuss about coherence and narrative analysis and translation. First, A. Coherence. Notion and concept, types of coherence, choice of design tool, and conclusion. That is fourth point that we're gonna talk in coherence. First, notion and concept. As far as linguistics is concerned, coherence is understood as the total of the mechanism which state coherence or correspondence to the system of explicit and implicit connective elements of the text immanent entity. In this perspective, Preston believes that it is hardly for a text which involves difference to have a strong coherence as a text with a fixed linear structure. From the cognitive point of view, coherence is regarded as a result of meaning tied to the reading process rather than to the text itself. So, language users establish coherence as soon as possible without waiting for the rest of the clause, sentence sequence, paragraph, or discourse. Said by Grande, 1991, in page 248. In relevancy theory, the issue of coherence is more closely concerned with the participant in the communication process. When reading a text or in other ways of communicative acts, one is, according to this theory, constantly researching for relevance, which exists between the units of meaning activated at the moment and those activated earlier in the discourse via through treatment of a relevant coherence theory. Second one, types of coherence. The role of inference in conversation process is the reason behind a long-standing debate between minimalist and constructivists. The first assume that inferences are made only when information is readily available and when the inference confers local coherence. According to constructivists, local coherence is based on global coherence and constructive processes. Said by Welan, 1993. Chen and Van Dijk in 2000, page 9, regard discourse as coherent not only if it is globally coherent, if it has a topic, but also when its respective presuppositions are locally or sequentially coherent. Such coherence for them is originally often accounted for in terms of meaning relation between subsequent presupposition. They define coherence in terms of mental models. They regard a text as coherent if it has a mental model, or from a psychological point of view, a text is coherent if a user is able to assign a mental model to it, or imagine a situation in which the text could be true. They call this kind of coherence as referential extensional, because it is defined in terms of the mental models of the events the text is about. First, local coherence. Traditionally, authors assume the job of relating to subsequent sentences or paragraphs. The basic tool is the order of this section. By using a consistent vocabulary and recognizable style, the authors can support the users at following their trained to thought and at building up coherence by themselves. A text is said to have local coherence if the elements and adjoining sentences are matching on a very best contextual level. Second, global coherence. Global coherence means a collective contextual framework of the whole text. A text will be globally coherent if the course domain or its reasonable context is transparent in all paragraphs of the text. They regard a text of high global coherence if it is with clear thread. Global coherence in Van Dijk and Keynes' firm organizes and orders predicates reference. Proposition and so on ground the central ones in imposes unity and sequences. Third, design choice for global coherence. Efforts to analyze existing intersectoral patterns can clarify many of the challenges and opportunity for a more coherent approach to global dialogue in bargains. All parties in such dialogue are, however, necessary to very high degree in their particular perspectives. A bottom-up approach clearly has some limitation. It would therefore also seem appropriate to take a complementary approach by looking to ways of representing the desired qualities of coherence and sustainability in ideal models of intersectoral dialogues as a global pattern, provided the diversity of sectors is duly respected by Grande 1991 in page 226. Expressed in such terms, the top-down approach becomes an exercise in design in the richest sense of the term. Some initial choices may be arbitrary, but constraints must emerge to determine the goodness of it, if of different pieces to possible position in the puzzle. 3. Choice of design tool. It is very clear that at the most fundamental level, different cultures favor different design criteria in selecting principles and pattern of organization. This also tends to be at the origin of certain differences between groups and function with any given culture. This suggests the need for a design tool which can be readily configured to reflect different design preferences. Computer-based tools are becoming increasingly available to designers to assist in the process of dialogue with customers. The point to be made is the globality can give rise to many different articulations at the local level. It is the set of possible articulation which reflects the full richness of globality. Any particular articulation of globality can only serve particular local interests. In this sense, it is the design tool which is the key to different insights to appropriate global organization, each of which is necessary, but none of which is sufficient. The conclusion: coherence is of different types, but the widely recognized kinds are local and global coherence. The importance of coherence lies in the way translators recognize it. The study shows the ability of translators to achieve local coherence because it is manageable through words and sentences of the text. Global coherence is not as easy as local coherence, since it needs wide knowledge to extract proposition to be bridged to control the whole text, which seems unmanageable for some translators in some cases. That is not to say that translators are unaware of the importance of coherence, but the ability to transform it within such a way into TL, taking into consideration all characteristic of such an approach needs a wide consideration and understanding of the elements included within the atmosphere of a text. B. Narrative analysis and translation. Definition. Type of narrative analysis and translation. Narrative analysis conducting guide. Application of narrative analysis. Example of narrative analysis. Purpose of narrative analysis. Characteristic of narrative analysis. Advantage of narrative analysis. Limitation of narrative analysis. And the last one is conclusion. First, definition. Narrative analysis is qualitative research methodology that involves examining and interpreting the stories or narrative people tell in order to gain insights into the meanings, experiences, and perspectives that underlie them. Narrative analysis can be applied to various forms of communication, including written text, oral interviews, and visual media.
The next slide is about 7 types of narrative analysis and translation. A. Content analysis. This type of narrative analysis involves examining the content of a narrative in order to identify themes, motifs, and other patterns. Researchers may use coding schemes to identify specific themes or categories within the text and then analyze how they are related to each other and to the overall narrative. Content analysis can be used to study various forms of communication, including written text, oral interview, and visual media. B. Structural analysis. This type of narrative analysis focuses on the formal structure of a narrative, including its plot, character development, and use of literary devices. Researchers may analyze the narrative arc, the relationship between the protagonist and antagonist, or the use of symbol and metaphor. Structural analysis can be useful for understanding how a narrative is constructed and how it affects the reader or the audience. C. Discourse analysis. This type of narrative analysis focuses on the language and discourse used in a narrative, including the social and cultural context in which it is situated. Researchers may analyze the use of specific words or verbs, the tone and style of the narrative, or the way in which social and cultural norms are reflected in the narrative. Discourse analysis can be useful for understanding how narratives are influenced by large social and cultural structures. D. Phenomenological analysis. This type of narrative analysis focuses on the subjective experience of the narrator and how they interpret and make sense of their experience. Researchers may analyze the language used to describe experience, the emotion expressed in the narrative, or the way in which the narrator constructs meaning from their experience. Phenomenological analysis can be useful for understanding how people make sense of their own lives and experience. E. Critical analysis. This type of narrative analysis involves examining the political, social, and ideological implication of a narrative, and questioning its underlying assumption and values. Researchers may analyze the ways in which a narrative reflects or references dominant power structure, or how it challenges or subverts those structures. Critical analysis can be useful for understanding the role that narrative play in shaping social and cultural norms. F. Autoethnography. This type of narrative analysis involves using personal narrative to explore cultural experience and identity formation. Researchers may use their own personal narratives to explore issues such as race, gender, or sexuality, and to understand how large social and cultural structures shape individual experience. Autoethnography can be useful for understanding how individuals negotiate and navigate complex cultural identities. G. Thematic analysis. This method involves identifying themes or patterns that emerge from the data, and then interpreting these themes in relation to the research question. Researchers may use a deductive approach where they start with a pre-existing theoretical frameworks, or an inductive approach where themes are generated from the data itself. The next slide, there are 5 narrative analysis conducting guide. A. Identify the research question. Narrative analysis begins with identifying the research question or topic of interest. Researchers may want to explore a particular social or cultural phenomenon, or gain a deeper understanding of a particular individual experience. B. Collect the narratives. Researchers then collect the narratives or stories that they will analyze. This can involve collecting written text, conducting interview, or analyzing visual media. C. Transcribe and code the narrative. Narratives have been collected. They are transcribed into a written format and then coded in order to identify themes, motifs, or other patterns. Researchers may use a coding scheme that has been developed specifically for the study, or they may use an existing coding scheme. D. Analyze the narratives. Researchers then analyze the narrative, focusing on the themes, motifs, and other patterns that have emerged from the coding process. They may also analyze the formal structure of the narrative, the language used, and the social and cultural context in which they are situated. E. Interpret the findings. Finally, researchers interpret the findings of the narrative analysis and draw conclusions about the meanings, experience, and perspective that underlies the narrative. They may use the findings to develop theories, make recommendations, or inform further research. Application of narrative analysis. Narrative analysis is a versatile qualitative research method that has application across a wide range of fields, including psychology, sociology, anthropology, literature, and history. Here are some examples of how narrative analysis can be used. First, understanding individual experience. Narrative analysis can be used to gain a deeper understanding of individual experience, including their thoughts, feelings, and perspective. For example, psychologists might use narrative analysis to explore the stories that individuals tell about their experience with mental illness. B. Exploring cultural and social phenomena. Narrative analysis can also be used to explore cultural and social phenomena, such as gender, race, and identity. Sociologists might use narrative analysis to examine how individuals understand and experience their gender identity. C. Analyzing historical events. Narrative analysis can be used to analyze historical events, including those that have been recorded in literary texts or personal accounts. Historians might use narrative analysis to explore the story of survivors of historical traumas, such as war or genocide. D. Examining media representation. Narrative analysis can be used to examine media representation of social and cultural phenomena, such as news story, film, or television show. Communication scholars might use narrative analysis to examine how news media represent different social groups. E. Developing intervention. Narrative analysis can be used to develop intervention to address social and cultural problems. For example, social workers might use narrative analysis to understand the experience of individuals who have experienced domestic violence and then use that knowledge to develop more effective intervention. The next slide, there are 5 examples of narrative analysis. The first, personal narrative of illness. Researchers have used narrative analysis to examine the personal narrative of individuals living with chronic illness, to understand how they make sense of their experience and construct their identities. B. Oral histories. Historians have used narrative analysis to analyze oral histories to gain insight into individual experience of historical events and social movements. C. Children's stories. Researchers have used narrative analysis to analyze children's stories to understand how they understand and make sense of the world around them. D. Memoirs. Researchers have used narrative analysis to analyze memoirs to understand how individuals construct their life stories and make sense of their experience. And the last E. Life histories. Researchers have used narrative analysis to examine life stories to gain insight into individual experiments of migration, displacement, or social exclusion.
Okay, next, number 6, purpose of narrative analysis. The purpose of narrative analysis is to gain a deeper understanding of the stories that individuals tell about their experience, identities, and beliefs. By analyzing the structure, contents, and context of the stories, researchers can uncover patterns and themes that shed light on the ways in which individuals make sense of their lives and the world around them. So, when to use narrative analysis? It is when in studying life stories. Narrative analysis can be useful in understanding how individuals construct their life stories, including the event, character, and theme that are important to them.
Next, analyzing cultural narrative. Narrative analysis can be used to analyze cultural narrative, such as myth, legends, and folk tales, to understand their meaning and function. Next, exploring organizational narratives. So, narrative analysis can be helpful too in examining the stories that organization tell about themselves, their stories, and their values, to understand how they shape the culture and practice of the organization. Next, investigating media narrative. Narrative analysis can be used to analyze media narrative such as news stories, film, and TV show to understand how they construct meaning and influence public perception. Last, examining policy narrative. Narrative analysis can be helpful in examining policy narrative, such as political speech and politicized document, to understand how they construct ideas and justify policy decision. Next, number 7, characteristic of narrative analysis. Here are some key characteristics of narrative analysis. 1. Focus on stories that are and narratives. Narrative analysis is concerned with analyzing the stories and narratives that people tell, whether they are oral or written, to understand how they shape and reflect individual experience and identities. 2. Emphasis of context. Narrative analysis seeks to understand the context in which the narrative are procedures and the social and cultural factors that shape them. 3. Interpretive approach. Narrative analysis is an interpretive approach that seeks to identify patterns and themselves in the stories and narrative, and to understand the meaning that individuals and communities attach to them. 4. Interactive process. So, narrative analysis involves an interactive process of analysis in which the researchers continually refine their understanding of the narrative as they examine more data. Number 5. Attention to language and form. Narrative analysis pays close attention to the language and form of the narrative, include the use of metaphor, imagery, and narrative structure to understand the meaning that individuals and communicates attach to them. Next, number 6, reflexivity. Narrative analysis is require the research to reflect on their own assumption and bias, and to consider how their own positionally may shape their interpretation of the narrative. Last, number 7, qualitative approach. Narrative analysis is typically a qualified research method that involves in-depth analysis of a small number of cases rather than large-scale qualitative studies. Advantage of narrative analysis. Here are some advantages of narrative analysis. Rich and detailed data. Narrative analysis provides rich and detailed data that allows for a deep understanding of individuals' experience, emotion, and identities. Next, humanizing approach. Narrative analysis allows individuals to tell their own stories and express their own perspective, which can help to humanize research and give voice to marginalized community. Next, holistic understanding. Narrative analysis allows researchers to understand individuals' experience in their entirety, including the social, cultural, and historical contents in which they occur. Next, flexibility. So, narrative analysis is a flexible research method that can be applied to a wide range of contents and research questions. Next, interpretative insight. Narrative and analysis provides interpretative insights into the meaning that individuals attach to their experience and the ways in which their structure construct their identities. Next, a profit for sensitive topic. Narrative analysis can be particularly useful in researching sensitive topics such as trauma or mental health, as it allows individuals to express their experience in their own words and on their own terms. And last, can lead the policy implication. So, narrative analysis can provide too that can be inform policy decision and interpretation, particularly in areas such as health, education, and social policy. Next, number 9, limitation of narrative analysis. Here are some of the limitations of narrative analysis. Number 1, subjectivity. Narrative analysis relies on the interpretation of research, which can be influenced by their own bias and assumption. 2, limited generalizability. So, narrative analysis typically involves in-depth analysis of a small number or case, which limit its generalizability to broader population. Number 3, ethical consideration. So the process of allocating and analyzing narrative can price their ethical concern, particularly when sensitive topics such as trauma or abuse are involved. Next, number 4, limited control over data collection. Narrative analysis often relies on data that is already available, such as interviews, oral histories, or written texts, which can limit the control that researchers have over the quality and completeness of the data. Next, number 5, time consuming. Narrative analysis can be a time consuming research method, particularly when analyzes large amount of data. Next, number 6, interpretation challenge. Narrative analysis required research to make complex interpretation of data, which can be challenging and time consuming. Next, limited statically analysis. So, narrative analysis is typically a qualitative research method that does not lead itself well to statistical analysis. Okay, the last we go to conclusion number 10. Overall, the purpose of narrative analysis is to provide a nuanced understanding of the ways in which individuals construct meaning and make sense of their lives. By analyzing the stories that individuals tell, research can gain insight into the complex and multifaceted nature of human experience. So, that's all our presentation. Sorry if there are some mistake or mispronunciation from us. Thank you for listening our presentation. See you on the next presentation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Stay safe and healthy.